My mother cast me out for her new family. Years later, she attacked me when I refused to fund her ruin. After years of building a life my mother tried to deny me, she reappeared at my Thanksgiving dinner. "You owe us," she seethed, demanding I pay for her new children's future. When I refused, her fury exploded, and the ensuing chaos changed everything, but not in the way she imagined. The city lights gleamed softly through my condo window, a million tiny diamonds scattered across the velvet darkness. From up here on the 27th floor, the world felt orderly, beautiful even. My life, the one I'd painstakingly built brick by brick from the rubble of my past, mirrored that view, successful, polished, and from a distance, perhaps even enviable. I just finalized a major project for my architecture firm, one that would likely earn me a promotion to partner before I turned 35. A quiet satisfaction settled in my chest, a warmth I'd learned to cultivate myself for myself. But sometimes, in the quiet hum of the HVAC system, a different kind of chill would surface, a whisper from a time when my world was anything but orderly, when the title of daughter felt more like a brand of inadequacy than a term of endearment. My earliest memories of my mother, Anna, are hazy, like watercolors left in the rain. I was her only child then, and she was a young, single mother, barely out of her teens herself. I remember her hands, often fluttering with a nervous energy, the scent of lavender from the cheap soap she used, and the way her laughter, when it came, was as surprising and bright as a rainbow after a storm. I was a quiet child, content with my books and crayons, always striving for that rare, brilliant smile. I draw her cards for every occasion, meticulously choosing colors, hoping the perfect shade of red for the roses would finally make her smile widen just for me, linger a little longer. Sometimes I sensed a weariness in her, a frustration that I, in my childish innocence, often felt responsible for. She never said it outright, but there was an unspoken current that I, by simply existing, was a reminder of a life she hadn't planned, a path harder than she'd envisioned. Then Mark entered our lives. I was about 8. He was older than Mom, with a steady gaze and a wallet that seemed to smooth out the anxious frown lines that had begun to etch themselves around her eyes. He brought with him a sense of stability, a new couch, and a subtle shift in the household dynamics. Suddenly, Mom's laughter was more frequent, though it rarely seemed to include me directly. Mark was never cruel. He was indifferent. A polite nod, a cursory, "How was school?" was the extent of our interaction. I became a fixture in the background of their burgeoning love story, a silent observer in my own home. The real shift, the one that began the slow, inexorable process of my unmaking as Anna's daughter, came with the birth of the twins, Leo and Lila. I was 12, teetering on the precipice of adolescence, already feeling like an awkward outsider. The twins were her fresh start, her chance at the perfect family she so desperately craved, a family that it became increasingly clear I didn't quite fit into. The house, once filled with the scent of Mom's occasional baking for just us, now perpetually smelled of baby powder and Mark's expensive, unfamiliar cologne. It was a constant reminder I was breathing someone else's air, an air I wasn't truly part of. My needs, my school events, my tentative teenage anxieties, all faded into the overwhelming symphony of new parenthood that consumed Anna and, by extension, Mark. As I navigated the treacherous waters of being 15, then 16, the distance grew into a chasm. I tried to help with the twins, hoping to earn my place, but my efforts were often met with impatience. "Chloe, can't you see I'm busy with my real family now?" she'd snap, the words slicing deeper than she probably intended, or perhaps exactly as deep as she intended. Or, "The twins need everything. You're old enough to fend for yourself." I learned to make myself small, to anticipate her moods, to try and preempt any perceived inconvenience my presence might cause. The day they formally cast me out is seared into my memory with a chilling clarity. It was a crisp autumn Saturday, a few months after my 16th birthday. Sun slanted through the living room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a deceptively peaceful scene. Anna, and Mark sat me down on the new couch, the one I rarely felt comfortable on. Anna's expression was carefully neutral, Mark's vaguely uneasy. "Chloe," Mom began, her voice devoid of its usual lilting tone, replaced by a flat, rehearsed quality. "Mark and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future, about what's best for everyone." I remember my heart beginning to thud a dull, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in my veins, that this wasn't going to be good. "It's not that we don't love you, Chloe, in our own way," she continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "But Mark and I have discussed it, and our primary responsibility, our joy, is with Leo and Lila. They deserve every opportunity, and frankly, your needs, they complicate that vision." Complicate. That's what I was. Not a daughter, but a complication. Mark cleared his throat, adding his practical, less emotional, but equally cutting assessment. "We need to consolidate our resources for the younger children, Chloe. It's just sensible. We want to give them the best possible start." I sat there, numb, a silent scream trapped in my throat. I wanted to rage, to weep, to demand how they could do this, how a mother could look at her child and see only a complication, a drain on resources. But no words came. My initial flaw, perhaps, was a deeply ingrained, desperate hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that if I just stayed quiet, if I didn't make a fuss, my mother would somehow wake up and see me again, her daughter. I felt inherently, fundamentally undeserving of even the space I occupied. So I nodded. A small, jerky movement. Relief flickered across Anna's face, quickly masked. "We thought it might be best if you went to live with Grandma and Grandpa," she said, the solution already neatly packaged. "They'd be happy to have you, I'm sure. It'll be good for you, too. More independence." Independence. The word she used to sugarcoat abandonment. That afternoon, I packed a small duffel bag with a few clothes, my worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and a framed picture of younger Anna and a much younger me, both smiling, a relic from a time that now felt like another life. Mom pressed a few $20 bills into my hand, her gaze already drifting towards the twins' nursery, where Leo was beginning to fuss. The money felt like severance pay for a childhood abruptly terminated. Her touch was brief, impersonal. The screen door slammed shut behind me, a period mark on 16 years of trying to be good enough. My grandparents, Eleanor and Richard, were shocked, their faces etched with a dismay that mirrored the hollowness inside me. They took me in without a word of reproach, their small guest room becoming my sanctuary. They were kind, their presence a balm, but they were also getting older, their income fixed and modest. And they walked a delicate line with Anna. For the sake of seeing Leo and Lila, their other grandchildren, they tried to maintain a fragile peace, a peace that often meant my pain, my story, was gently sidestepped in conversations, lest it cause waves. I was safe, sheltered, but the echo of my mother's rejection was a constant companion. The next few years were a blur of finishing high school, working a part-time job at a local diner, the smell of stale coffee and grease clinging to my clothes, and navigating the stilted, infrequent encounters with Anna and Mark. They'd visit my grandparents on major holidays, bringing the twins, who grew chubbier and louder with each passing year. Our interactions were formal, almost painfully polite. Anna would often make comments like, "Chloe, you're managing so well on your own, aren't you? So resourceful." Each word felt like another twist of a knife, another attempt to justify what she'd done by painting me as someone who thrived on being discarded. When it came time for college, my dream of studying architecture felt impossibly distant. Anna and Mark, predictably, refused to co-sign any loans. "We have Leo and Lila's future college funds to consider, Chloe," Anna had said coolly over the phone, her voice betraying no hint of maternal obligation. "You understand." Oh, I understood. I understood that I was on my own. The lifeline came from an unexpected quarter, Uncle John, Anna's younger brother. He was a quiet, kind man who had always seemed a bit out of place in our family's often sharp-edged dynamics. He'd heard about my situation through my grandparents and, without hesitation, agreed to co-sign my student loans. It was an act of faith I would never forget. College was a relentless grind. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs: library assistant, coffee shop barista, late-night data entry, while juggling a full course load. Sleep became a luxury, but every late night spent hunched over drafting tables, every early morning shift, every grade I earned, every dollar I saved, was a brick in the wall I was building around myself. Not just to keep them out, but to prove to myself over and over that I was enough, even if my own mother didn't think so. I was forging armor, piece by painstaking piece. I wouldn't let them break me. I vowed I wouldn't. The girl who had quietly accepted her dismissal was slowly, painfully, being remade into someone else, someone stronger. Someone who, one day, might even look out over city lights from her own window and feel a sense of peace. The years after college unspooled with a determined rhythm. I moved to a new city, chasing opportunity, and poured myself into my fledgling career in architecture. The armor I'd begun forging in those difficult teenage years grew thicker, more resilient. I found a small apartment, then a slightly larger one, and eventually, with a down payment saved from years of disciplined living and a small inheritance from a great aunt I'd barely known, I bought the condo where I now lived. My professional life flourished. I was good at what I did, driven by a quiet intensity that my employers valued. I built a small, carefully curated circle of friends, people like Maria, a sharp, witty colleague from my firm who knew a carefully edited version of my past, enough to understand my occasional need for solitude, but not so much that it invited pity. Contact with Anna and Mark was virtually non-existent, relegated to curt holiday cards sent to my grandparents' address, which they would then forward. I learned through the infrequent, strained updates from Grandma Eleanor that Mark had ventured into some business, that the twins were growing up, involved in sports and school activities. I felt a distant, detached sort of curiosity, the kind one might feel for characters in a book read long ago. The pain of their rejection had dulled, buried under layers of achievement and self-sufficiency, but it was still there, a fault line deep within. Then came the promotion. After nearly a decade at the firm, after countless late nights and sacrifice weekends, I was offered a senior associate position, with a clear path to partnership. It was a significant milestone, a tangible validation of everything I'd worked for. A quiet, profound sense of triumph settled over me. I'd done it. Despite everything, I'd carved out a life, a successful one, on my own terms. Uncle John was ecstatic when I told him. His pride was genuine, a warm contrast to the cool indifference I'd grown accustomed to from my mother's side of the family. "You've done so well, Chloe girl," he'd said, his voice beaming over the phone. "So incredibly well. I even mentioned it to Anna the other day when I spoke to your grandma. Thought she'd be pleased to hear it." A familiar dread, cold and sharp, settled in my stomach at his words. "You told Mom?" "Well, yes," he'd replied, oblivious to the sudden chill in my voice. "A mother should know when her daughter's succeeding, shouldn't she? Maybe it'll, bridge some gaps." Some gaps, I knew, were chasms too wide to be bridged. Some ghosts were never truly laid to rest. They just waited for an invitation to reappear. The invitation, it seemed, had been unwittingly delivered. It was Thanksgiving a few weeks later. I decided against traveling to my grandparents that year. The thought of a potential encounter with Anna, however brief, felt too draining. Instead, I was hosting a small, peaceful dinner for myself and Maria. The aroma of roasted turkey and sage stuffing, a scent I'd worked hard to associate with my own peace and contentment, filled my apartment. The city lights twinkled outside. My haven felt secure. Then the doorbell rang. Maria looked at me, puzzled. "Expecting someone else?" I shook my head, a knot of unease tightening in my chest. I wasn't. I opened the door to a scene I could never have braced myself for. There stood Anna and Mark, and behind them, 2 teenagers I vaguely recognized as Leo and Lila. They were about 17 now, Lila with a bored, slightly disdainful expression as she scrolled through her phone, Leo looking around my lobby with a mixture of awkwardness and open curiosity. "Is this all yours?" he blurted out, his eyes wide as they took in the view from my floor-to-ceiling windows. Anna pushed past me into the apartment, a strained, overly bright smile plastered on her face. Mark followed, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Chloe, darling," Anna exclaimed, her voice a little too loud, a little too saccharine. We found ourselves in the city, and your Uncle John told us about your wonderful news. We're so incredibly proud. We've missed you terribly." The cloying scent of her perfume, a heavy gardenia I'd always associated with her most manipulative moods, filled my space, instantly souring the festive air. Maria stood by the kitchen counter, her eyebrows raised in a silent question. "Mom, Mark," I said, my voice carefully neutral, though my heart was hammering. "This is unexpected." "Oh, don't be silly, it's Thanksgiving," Anna trilled, waving a dismissive hand as if my shock was an overreaction. "Family should be together." She glanced around my living room, her eyes lingering on the artwork, the quality of the furnishings. A strange expression, something akin to a reassessment, flickered across her face. The pleasantries, if one could call them that, didn't last long. After a few awkward exchanges, with Leo and Lila mostly ignoring me in favor of their devices, Anna got to the point. They'd sat, uninvited, on my sofa, making themselves at home in a way that set my teeth on edge. "So, Chloe," Anna began, her tone shifting from forced cheer to a more serious, almost conspiratorial note. "Uncle John tells us you're doing exceptionally well. That promotion, it sounds very impressive." "I'm comfortable," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "Comfortable," she repeated, a slight edge to her voice. Then the facade truly dropped. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "Actually, Chloe, we're here because, things have been a bit difficult for us lately." Mark shifted uncomfortably beside her. "My business, it didn't pan out as we'd hoped," he mumbled, staring at his hands. "We've had some setbacks." Anna waved his explanation away impatiently. "The point is, Leo and Lila are looking at colleges now. Top-tier schools, naturally. They're bright. They deserve the best possible start in life. And these places, they don't come cheap." A cold dread washed over me. I knew where this was going. "You're doing so well, Chloe," Anna continued, her voice now laced with an unmistakable expectation. "It's only right that you help your family. We sacrificed for you when you were small, you know. It was a struggle, raising a child alone before Mark came along." The audacity was breathtaking. Sacrificed? She had discarded me. Mark chimed in, his voice gaining a little more confidence now that the difficult part was out. "Your mother is right, Chloe. We're in a temporary bind. A successful daughter helping out, it's what families do. Think of it as an investment in their future and, a way to make things right between us all." Make things right? They were the ones who had shattered any semblance of rightness years ago. I looked at the two teenagers, who were now watching me with a new, calculating interest. A fleeting image of my younger self, standing alone with a duffel bag and a handful of cash, flashed through my mind. Then the years of self-sufficiency, the hard-won independence, solidified within me. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, the single word cutting through Anna's entitled monologue. Anna blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no," I repeated, my gaze steady. "I will not be paying for anything. You made your priorities very clear a long time ago. You told me they deserved your resources, not me. You taught me to fend for myself. So I did. My success is mine, earned without any help from either of you. I owe you nothing." The silence that followed was thick, charged. Maria had stopped pretending to busy herself in the kitchen and was watching, wide-eyed. Leo and Lila looked from me to their mother, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Anna's face, which had been arranged in an expression of hopeful expectation, began to crumble. Her eyes narrowed, and a flush crept up her neck. "Ow! How dare you?" she sputtered, her voice rising. "After everything I did for you, all the sacrifices I made." There was her familiar refrain, the one designed to trigger guilt. "What sacrifices, Mom?" I asked, my voice still calm, though a tremor was starting inside me. The sacrifice of telling your 16-year-old daughter she was a complication? The sacrifice of prioritizing your new family to the point of erasing your first child? Those are the sacrifices I remember. You were always such a difficult child, she shrieked, abandoning all pretense of civility. Her carefully constructed composure shattered like cheap glass. Too sensitive, too demanding. And now look at you, sitting here in your fancy apartment, hoarding your money while your own blood, your own brother and sister are struggling to get the education they deserve. They deserve what you provide for them, I said, my voice hardening. Just as you decided I deserved nothing from you. You taught me that lesson very, very well. That was when she lunged. It happened so fast. One moment she was screaming, her face contorted with rage. The next, she was on her feet, her hand arcing through the air. The crack of her palm connecting with my cheek echoed in the sudden, stunned silence of the room. The sting was sharp, immediate, but sharper still was the sudden, icy clarity that washed over me. The last, fragile thread of any lingering, subconscious hope I might have harbored for the mother I wished she could be, snapped. It was gone. Forever. You owe us, she screamed, her eyes wild. Maria gasped. Leo and Lila stared, mouths agape, a flicker of fear finally dawning in their eyes. I touched my stinging cheek, not in pain, but almost in wonder. This was it. This was who she was. The love, if it had ever truly, unconditionally existed, was undeniably dead. Get out, I said, my voice dangerously low, devoid of any emotion except a chilling finality. All of you, get out of my house. Now. Mark, finally jolted into action by the physical violence, grabbed Anna's arm. Anna, stop it. Let's go. He urged, his face pale. She tried to shake him off, still spitting venom. But he was stronger, or perhaps a rage had momentarily exhausted her. He pulled her, still ranting about my ingratitude and her sacrifices, towards the door. Leo and Lila scrambled after them, casting confused, frightened glances back at me. The door slammed shut, leaving behind a ringing silence, the lingering scent of her perfume, and a Thanksgiving dinner that would never be eaten. Maria rushed to my side, her face a mask of concern, but I barely registered her. Something inside me had irrevocably shifted. The fight I hadn't known I was still in, the fight for a mother's love, was finally, definitively over. And in a strange, painful way, I felt a sliver of something I hadn't expected: liberation. The silence that descended after they left was heavy, suffocating. Maria was wonderful, fussing over my cheek, which was already beginning to show a faint red mark, her voice a low murmur of outrage and sympathy. But I was miles away, replaying the scene, the raw ugliness of it. The slap hadn't just been a physical blow. It was the violent tearing of a veil, revealing the unvarnished truth of my mother's nature. The days that followed were a new kind of siege. Humiliated and enraged by my refusal and her loss of control, Anna began a relentless campaign of harassment. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls from unknown numbers, which, when I occasionally answered, would be her voice veering wildly between tearful, guilt-inducing monologues about her sacrifices as a young mother and venomous accusations of my heartlessness. My email inbox became a dumping ground for her lengthy, rambling messages, filled with distorted memories of my childhood, where she was the perpetual martyr and I, the ungrateful burden. She recounted every diaper changed, every meal cooked, as if these basic parental duties were extraordinary favors I was now obligated to repay with my future. She even tried to manipulate my grandparents, painting herself as the victim of a cold, unfeeling daughter. Thankfully, Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Richard, though distressed by the whole situation, were beginning to see the depths of Anna's manipulative behavior more clearly than ever before. I tried to ignore it, to delete the emails unread, to block the numbers. But her words, her accusations, seeped under my skin, stirring a toxic brew of anger, residual guilt, and a weary frustration. Was I being too harsh? A tiny, insidious voice, conditioned by years of seeking her approval, would sometimes whisper. Was she still, despite everything, my mother, deserving of some measure of, what? Forgiveness? Understanding? The internal conflict was exhausting. Then she escalated. I was in a client meeting presenting a new design concept when my assistant discreetly handed me an urgent note. Your mother is in the lobby, causing a scene. A wave of nausea hit me. My professional sanctuary, the place I'd built on merit and hard work, was about to be violated. Excusing myself, my heart pounding, I hurried to the reception area. There was Anna, louder and more disheveled than I'd ever seen her, arguing with the firm's head of security. She was crying, gesturing wildly, telling anyone within earshot about her struggling family and her ungrateful, wealthy daughter who refused to help. The humiliation was acute, searing. This was a public unraveling designed to shame me, to pressure me. With a cold resolve I didn't know I possessed, I instructed security to escort her from the building and informed them she was not to be allowed access again. As they led her away, still shouting about my cruelty, I saw the curious, pitying glances from my colleagues. My office, my carefully constructed world of competence and respect, now felt tainted by her chaos. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. That evening, shaken but resolute, I called Ms. Evans, a lawyer Maria had recommended, a sharp, empathetic woman specializing in family disputes and harassment. As I recounted the events, from the Thanksgiving ambush to the workplace invasion, Ms. Evans listened patiently, her expression serious. Document everything, Chloe, she advised. Every call, every email, every incident. We need a clear record. A few days later, as I was trying to piece together a timeline of Anna's harassment for Ms. Evans, my grandparents called. They sounded graver than I'd ever heard them. Chloe, dear, Grandma Eleanor began, her voice trembling slightly. There's something we should have told you about your mother a long time ago. Maybe if we had, you would have understood, or at least been better prepared. And so, the first twist in this painful saga unfolded. They told me about Anna's own mother, my maternal grandmother, a woman I'd never known as she had passed away when I was very young. She had apparently been an intensely critical, emotionally withholding woman. Anna, they explained, had spent her entire youth desperately seeking an approval that never came, constantly feeling like a disappointment. Your mother, she always chased an image, Chloe, Grandma said, her voice laced with a deep sadness. An image of a perfect life, a perfect family, and anything or anyone that didn't fit that image. Well, she had a way of trying to erase them or blame them for her own unhappiness. I think she's more afraid than hateful, deep down, but fear can make people terribly cruel. They also revealed that Mark's financial woes were far more severe than he'd let on, largely due to Anna's relentless pushing for risky business ventures and her own inability to manage money. She was terrified of losing the comfortable lifestyle Mark had provided, the status she craved. Her desperation wasn't just about the twins' college funds. It was about her own impending downfall. This revelation didn't excuse Anna's behavior, not by a long shot, but added a layer of tragic, pitiable depth to her character. She wasn't just a monster. She was a deeply damaged woman, perpetuating a cycle of dysfunction. It didn't lessen my resolve to protect myself, but it did temper some of the raw anger with a strange, aching sorrow. The final confrontation, my rock bottom, came a week later. I was returning home from a late dinner with Maria, feeling a fragile sense of calm after confiding in her about my grandparents' revelations. As I stepped out of the elevator on my floor, I saw her, Anna, lurking in the shadows near my apartment door. She looked unhinged. Her hair was matted, her eyes wide and bloodshot. We need to talk, Chloe, she hissed, stepping forward, blocking my path. There's nothing left to say, Mom, I said, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone and my purse. You need to leave. You think you can just destroy my life and walk away? She snarled, her voice cracking. You think you're so high and mighty in your fancy apartment while your family falls apart because of your selfishness? Before I could react, before I could even dial 911, she lunged. It wasn't a slap this time. It was a tackle, a desperate, clumsy explosion of rage. We both went down, my purse flying, its contents scattering across the hallway floor. Her nails raked at my arm, drawing blood. She was screaming incoherently, blaming me for Mark's threats to leave her, for the creditors calling, for every misery in her life. I could smell the stale coffee and something else, something sour and unwashed, on her breath. This wasn't just anger. It was a complete unraveling. Fear, sharp and primal, lanced through me. But beneath it, a cold, hard fury ignited. I fought back, pushing, trying to get her off me. The struggle was chaotic, terrifying. Then, I heard a door open down the hall. My neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, an elderly couple I exchanged pleasantries with, peered out. Mrs. Henderson gasped, her hand flying in her mouth. Mr. Henderson, a retired police officer, didn't hesitate. "Hey, get off her!" he yelled, his voice a sudden, authoritative bark that momentarily startled Anna. He was already dialing his phone. His intervention, and the sound of approaching sirens, someone else must have called too, seemed to break through Anna's frenzy. She scrambled off me, her face a mask of terror as the reality of what she'd done began to sink in. The police arrived within minutes. The scene was surreal. Me, bruised, scratched, my clothes torn. Anna, cowering against the wall, suddenly looking small and pathetic. My neighbors providing calm, factual accounts. An officer gently helped me up. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" I looked at my mother, at the wreckage of the woman who had given me life, and then systematically tried to take parts of it away. The anger was still there, but so was that profound, aching pity my grandparents' story had instilled. For a fleeting second, I hesitated. Then I met the officer's gaze, my own clearing with a certainty that came from the deepest part of my soul. The cycle had to stop. "Here. Now." "Yes, officer," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "I do. I want to press charges for assault." As they cuffed her, reading her rights, Anna began to weep. Not, I suspected, from remorse, but from self-pity and the dawning horror of consequences. Watching them lead her away, a strange quiet settled over me. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the end of the battle. I had finally, unequivocally, chosen to protect myself. The next day, Ms. Evans was in motion. And then came the second, unexpected twist. Mark, apparently horrified by Anna's arrest and the public nature of her meltdown, and likely seeing the financial and social ship sinking completely with her at the helm, contacted my lawyer. He was leaving Anna, and he was willing to provide a statement, even evidence, detailing Anna's manipulations, her increasingly erratic behavior, her obsession with getting money from me, and her refusal to acknowledge their dire financial straits, which she had largely caused. He had text messages, voicemails from Anna to him that painted a damning picture of her state of mind and her premeditated intent. It was an act born partly of self-preservation, no doubt, a desire to distance himself from her legal and social implosion. But it was also, Ms. Evans relayed, tinged with a reluctant, dawning understanding of the toxicity he'd been complicit in for years. He wanted to protect himself, yes, but also, he claimed, what was left of a future for Leo and Lila, away from Anna's destructive influence. His information became decisive evidence, strengthening my case for a restraining order and painting a clear picture for the authorities. Uncle John, when he heard everything, was devastated by Anna's actions, but became my staunchest supporter, a quiet rock of empathy, full of regret for his own naivete in unwittingly triggering her reappearance in my life. The battle had been brutal, but I wasn't standing entirely alone in its aftermath. The legal proceedings were draining, but Ms. Evans handled everything with calm professionalism. Armed with the police report, my testimony, the Hendersons' corroborating statements, and perhaps most damningly, the information Mark provided, obtaining a permanent restraining order against Anna was straightforward. The judge's signature on that document didn't feel like a victory, not in the triumphant sense. It felt like a quiet affirmation, a legally binding line drawn in the sand. My peace, my safety, was now protected by law. Anna faced the consequences of her assault. Given it was a first offense and I wasn't gravely injured, she avoided jail time but was sentenced to probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and a significant fine. The greater punishment, however, was the implosion of her life. Mark had indeed left her, taking Leo and Lila with him to live temporarily with his sister in another state. The twins, Ms. Evans had learned through Mark's lawyer, were confused, scared, and angry, not at me, but their mother, whose actions had shattered their world. The perfect future Anna had so desperately wanted for them, the future she'd been willing to ruin me to obtain, was now in jeopardy because of her own destructive choices. Socially, Anna was isolated. My grandparents, while heartbroken by the entire situation and the state of their daughter, finally and firmly stood by me. They still loved Anna, I supposed, in the complicated way parents love their children, even when they falter spectacularly. But they condemned her actions towards me unequivocally and limited their contact with her, their disappointment a palpable weight. Uncle John remained a steadfast source of support, his quiet presence a comfort. In the weeks and months that followed, a fragile quiet began to settle over my life. The constant barrage of calls and emails from Anna ceased. The fear of an unexpected confrontation faded. I still jumped at sudden noises sometimes, and the memory of her hands on me, her face contorted with rage, would occasionally surface in nightmares. But the raw, acute trauma was slowly being replaced by a dull ache, the kind that signals a wound is healing, however slowly. I realized I needed more than just legal protection. I needed emotional healing. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Ramirez, a kind woman with gentle eyes who helped me unpack years of buried pain, not just from the recent events, but from the initial abandonment, the long struggle for self-worth. We talked about the complex grief of mourning a mother who was still alive but lost to me, perhaps had always been lost to me in some fundamental way. We explored the insidious nature of guilt that Anna had so expertly woven into the fabric of my upbringing. It was hard work, painful work, but with each session, I felt a little lighter, a little more centered. My definition of family, too, began to reshape itself. It wasn't about blood ties dictated by birth, but about connections forged in respect, support, and unconditional love. My true family was small, but it was strong. My grandparents, whose love, though sometimes quiet and complicated by their relationship with Anna, had always been a steady presence. Uncle John, whose quiet act of kindness in co-signing my college loans had been a pivotal moment, and whose unwavering support now meant the world. And Maria, my fiercely loyal friend, who had stood by me without judgment, offering outrage on my behalf when I was too numb to feel it myself, and quiet companionship when I just needed to not be alone. Thanksgiving, the following year, was a world away from the disastrous confrontation that had precipitated Anna's final unraveling. It was a small gathering in my apartment. My grandparents, Uncle John, and Maria. There was no tension, no forced pleasantries. The food tasted better, the laughter was genuine, the conversation flowed easily. Looking around at their faces, illuminated by the soft glow of the candles, I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the fireplace. This was the warmth I'd always craved, the sense of belonging, built not on obligation or a desperate need for approval, but on love freely given and received. This was family. I eventually decided to redecorate my apartment, not because it held only bad memories. It was also the place I had celebrated successes and found solace, but because I wanted to reclaim the space fully, to infuse it with a new energy, a new chapter. I chose new colors, lighter and brighter, bought a new rug for the spot where Anna had stood making her demands, and filled the rooms with plants that thrived in the sunlight. It was a symbolic act, a cleansing. I rarely heard news of Anna directly. Occasionally, my grandparents would mention her in hushed tones. She was living alone in a small, rented apartment, struggling financially. Her attempts at reconciliation with Mark and the twins rebuffed. There was a part of me, a very small, buried part, that felt a pang of something akin to pity. But it was a distant emotion, like watching a ship sink on a far horizon. She had made her choices, and she was living with their consequences just as I was living with mine. My choices had led me here, to a life of peace, strength, and carefully tended happiness. The scars from my mother's rejection and her final, violent outbursts would likely always be there, faint lines on the landscape of my past. But they no longer define me. They were a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had survived and the strength I had found within myself to draw a line and say, no more. I learned that the deepest betrayals can come from those who are supposed to love us most, but also that resilience is born in those broken places. The most important boundaries, I realized, are the ones we set to protect our own soul, our own peace. Looking out at the city lights now, from my window on the 27th floor, I no longer see just an orderly, beautiful world. I see a world full of complexities, of pain and joy, of shadow and light. And I see myself, a woman who walked through the shadows and found her own way to the light, not unscathed but whole. It took a long, painful journey to realize that family isn't just about blood ties. It's about who lifts you up, not who tears you down, who respects your boundaries, and who celebrates your strength. My story is one of those complexities, but it's mine, and it is, finally, a story of peace. Perhaps you, listening to this, have had to redefine what family means to you or fight for your own peace. If so, know that you're not alone in that journey, and that strength, like light, can always be found, even after the deepest darkness.